Oh, hi there. Welcome to lecture number 5 with Miss Everspacher. That's me, and you're you. And as you can tell, I missed real class things. But this will suffice for now. In the very beginning of our reading journey, we talked a little bit about narrator reliability. It was just one of my discussion questions. But today I want to delve into how we address narrator reliability. Can you trust the narrator in your story? Are they reliable or are they unreliable? And this is an activity that you are going to use to evaluate the level of reliability that Holden presents for us. This is a really great book to look at this idea. So, let's talk a little bit about reliable versus unreliable narrators. So, the idea of a reliable narrator is that the narrator will have values that are very closely related to the central message in a text, that they will be true representatives of whatever is happening. The idea is that when they represent the text and when they represent the activities that happen in the text, that they will represent it honestly from all perspectives. Often omniscient narration lends itself very well to a reliable narrator, because an omniscient narrator is picture like God looking down and talking about like what everyone is doing at every given time. They can pop into what's happening over, with Tommy, and then pop in and see what's happening with Jill, and they can give a full picture of what's happening. We like to believe that reliable narration happens in journalism, that the person who is writing about something, that they are representing the text and the experiences and the people that things say honestly. Now, we know from this past year of looking at rhetoric, of looking at logic, that this does not always happen in journalism. And really, the argument is kind of that it doesn't truly happen anywhere. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But just really quick, an unreliable narrator is considered an untrustworthy storyteller. They might be something like a child, or maybe they're just really innocent, or they're an outsider and they don't understand what they're seeing. Like you go to a foreign country and you don't understand some customs. Maybe they're insane. Maybe they're a criminal. Perhaps they're otherworldly, like a ghost. Can't really trust a ghost. I don't go around being like, oh, you're a ghost, I trust you. Maybe they're an intentional liar. Maybe they're doing it all on purpose. The reality is that there probably is no such thing as a fully reliable narrator, because we are always approaching an experience or something we see from our own viewpoint, and we can't get inside of the brain of someone else to fully represent how someone else might be impacted by the same thing. So, when we're looking at reliable versus unreliable narrators, we're really trying to determine the level of credibility within the narrator. So if you're a reliable narrator, for the most part, your credibility is going to be pretty good. You're not going to be a fully reliable narrator because you have, not you, or I'm just the narrator, you know what I mean. You can't be a fully reliable narrator because you have your own perspective and you're coming to an issue with only the understanding that you have. And we can never have full knowledge of really anything. We're limited in that capacity, unfortunately. Except for me, I know everything, so just keep that in mind. And then with unreliable narrators, we're looking more at those kinds of narrators that are very obviously not somebody that we can trust. And so we have to really consider what they're saying and consider what they're not saying or how they're representing it. So, what you do in order to determine their level of credibility is you consider 4 different levels of deception. One, there's honest deception, and we're going to delve into all of these. there's dishonest deception, there's evaluation issues, and then other considerations. And these 4 things will help you determine how unreliable your narrator actually is and how much you need to trust them. And why is trust important? Honestly, in terms of reading a literary text for fun, it's not. I think trust is important when you're reading nonfiction in particular, as it's trying to influence you. We've looked a lot at that this year. But I think when you're reading literature like this, it's just important to note and important to consider what other factors might be at play if you do have an unreliable narrator. They can be kind of fun to read. All right, so let's first look at honest deception. So honest deception, which this is spelled wrong, deceit peon. I'm going to change that later, but we're just going to enjoy that typo. So, hey, your English teachers do make mistakes. Honest deception does not intentionally deceive the reader. We're not going out of our way to lie to you. Usually you have somebody who's very inexperienced about the topic that's being represented in the text. They might just be ignorant. And a really good example of this is a child. So, when you're hanging out with a little kid and they are trying to tell you a story, they are definitely telling it from their perspective, and they are missing, most likely, some major elements of the experience. We don't fully trust everything that kids say, and we usually want to get a bigger understanding, a bigger picture of what actually happened. So honest deception is just, hey, I don't know much about it. I'm kind of and I'm just doing my best to represent what I saw. Dishonest deception is intentional lying. And I actually just watched Tangled for the first time last week. And I thought she was a really great example of somebody who directly lies to Rapunzel and basically manipulates her entire life. So in dishonest deception, we are directly being lied to. The narrator is trying to deceive us or sway us and make us think a certain way. Perhaps the narrator might have some sort of psychological instability, and in that case, he or she would be deceiving even themselves because they're mentally not capable of seeing a situation in the correct way. And usually in dishonest deception, we're seeing the narrator exhibit some sort of hypocrisy. So they say one thing and then they do another, or they condemn one thing and then they do that very thing that they also condemn. You also want to consider evaluation issues. So we looked at this a little bit last week in terms of judgments. Evaluation is another way that we could say the word judgment. So in evaluation issues, you want to consider, is the narrator a poor judge of reality? When they look at a situation, are they looking at it in a similar way that the rest of the people in the text are looking at that situation, or are they looking at it in a dramatically different way and perhaps not a very intelligent way? We also want to see if the narrator has divergent morals from the norm within the text. So do they value different things than everybody else in the text? And then is the narrator's perception of events different from others? So do they just experience the world differently? It's really something to consider when you're listening to their story. And finally, a few questions more. Does the narrator have any clear bias? Are they very opinionated towards one direction and unwilling to change their mind and unwilling to capitulate any of their ideas? Do they have any ulterior motives? Is there a reason why they're telling this story this way? How old is the narrator? Are they too young to really represent these things correctly? And then how limited in knowledge is the narrator? What's their education level? And not just their education level, what's their education level on the topic at hand and the thing that they are talking about? That's going to be the most important part. That also should have a question mark on it. So look at that. Real live editing for all of you. Ultimately, these questions can help you decide how much to trust your narrator and the level of reliability and authenticity you can give to them. Today, in your, well, not today, but this week, as your big assignment, instead of doing a discussion, you are going to evaluate Holden's reliability as a narrator in this text. We're 23 chapters in at this point. You should have plenty of examples to answer any of these questions. So, what you're going to do is you're going to evaluate him on all 4 of these points. So, with honest deception, you're going to look and see if Holden is ignorant about any facts. You're going to consider whether you would say Holden is experienced. And then you're going to talk about whether Holden neglects to tell the reader things. And you're going to say yes or no. And you're going to give me an example from the text of that taking place. So this just needs to be a check, but this needs to be a quote from the text. Quote from text with page number. With dishonest deception, you are going to discuss if Holden's attempted to deceive us, is he mentally unstable, and is Holden a hypocrite? Evaluation issues, does Holden have a hard time evaluating situations correctly? And does Holden have different morals than the average person? And then our other considerations. Is he biased about any situations? Does Holden have any ulterior motives behind telling his story? Would you consider Holden too young to accurately tell his story? And does Holden have limited knowledge, limited body of knowledge, or limited education? So make sure that you give me a little bit of analysis on this too. I want the quote to make sense in answering this question. So make sure you've got a quote, but make sure you also directly answer the question like, is Holden mentally unstable? Well, we know from the beginning of the book and the end of the book, the quotes that I told you where it clearly shows that he is in a like some sort of mental health institution, I would probably want to take a quote. I would probably say yes. And I would take a quote from one of those 2 sections. But then I would also make sure that I state directly Holden is in a mental health institution and says X, Y, and Z. So make sure you give me the full breadth of it. This is your only piece this week that is getting graded in the final product space. So it will have a nice little hit on your grade if you do it well, but it also can have a hit on your grade if you don't. And then down here at the very bottom, just on a level 1 to 10 after you do this, 10 is very unreliable narrator and 1 is the most honest person in the world. How would you rate Holden's reliability from 1 to 10? If you have questions, come see me in office hours. But this is our focus for this week, and I will look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.